Vikings, let's win this game.
Attention fans! The mood shifted fast in Minnesota. J.J. McCarthy just gave a direct statement about trade talks involving his name. And the Vikings are holding a private workout with an All-American punter prospect. Plus, indications suggest the team is not expected to use its first 2 picks on a position of clear need. But why? And listen, the last story here isn't just off-season noise. It's about a player who has gained major influence inside the locker room. That matters more than people think. Let's get into it. This first story hits the most delicate spot on the roster right away. Whenever the conversation turns back to the quarterback competition, fans instantly go on alert. And that's exactly what's happening now, because J.J. McCarthy's name has resurfaced in discussions about his future, his role, and his value within the franchise. The spark for this conversation came from Darren Wolfson, who doesn't see the Vikings leaning toward trading McCarthy, even if he doesn't immediately lock down the starting job. That already shifts the tone, because one thing is debating competition. Another is assuming the team would move on from him at the first sign of turbulence. That's a very different conversation. I don't see this situation as simple. McCarthy is still at that stage of his career where almost everything can be interpreted in 2 different ways. Some people see youth, upside, and a strong arm to develop. Others see urgency, inconsistency, and a path that's still unfinished. Both sides have arguments. But on a roster that knows how brutal a long season can be at the position, giving up on him right now would feel way too rushed. To be completely honest with you, this is where I think a lot of outside analysis misses the point. The debate shouldn't just be, is he ready yet or not? The real question is, why would the team rush to decide everything right now? That's where the stakes really are. Kevin O'Connell has already lived through seasons where he had to shuffle that position multiple times, so it's not a stretch at all to believe that depth there matters more than making a flashy offseason move. And what makes this even more interesting is that the noise isn't coming from just one place. Adam Thielen spoke about McCarthy with a level of respect that stands out. He said he likes the kid's mindset, that you can feel his competitive edge, and that he carries that chip on his shoulder from someone who still has a lot to prove. When a veteran like Thielen says something like that, it's not empty praise. It's a locker room read. It's real insight. And that stuff matters. McCarthy also carries a factor that weighs heavily in evaluating any young quarterback: lost time. The injury interrupted part of his natural development process, took away reps, took away game action, and disrupted the rhythm he needed to build. That impacts decision-making, timing, and comfort. It's not a permanent excuse, but it is real context. And without context, analysis becomes shallow. His numbers from last year help explain why this conversation is so divided. J.J. McCarthy threw for 1,632 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions, while also showing some ability as a runner. That's not production that ends the debate, but it's also not production that tells you to give up. It's the output of a young player trying to find his footing under heavy pressure. And there's a huge difference between that and declaring failure too early. In the end, this story isn't just about trade rumors. It's about how the Vikings view their own investment. If the team truly doesn't want to move on from McCarthy right now, then the message is clear. There's still strong belief in his development. And whether you like it or not, that keeps the temperature of this debate high for a while longer. Drop your take in the comments, because this topic splits the fan base right down the middle. And stay with me, because the next story shifts away from quarterback and into an area almost nobody talks about, until it suddenly starts affecting games. Some news doesn't arrive with loud headlines, but it lights up a positive signal for those who pay attention to roster details. It doesn't involve a superstar. It doesn't involve a battle for the starting job. Even so, it shows a level of care that fans expect from a serious franchise. And this time, the name that showed up on the radar is Jeff Yurk. According to the latest report, the Vikings have scheduled a private workout with Yurk, a punter out of Elon with a strong resume at the football championship subdivision level. The first reaction from many people was almost automatic. Didn't they already bring in Johnny Hekker? Yes, they did, and that changes the entire interpretation, because this move doesn't look like desperation. It looks like preparation. It looks like a team trying to stay ahead instead of reacting late. And that's usually where smart roster building starts. Jeff Yurk doesn't enter this conversation as a draft celebrity. He comes in as a scouting profile. And sometimes that's exactly where hidden value comes from. He built a very consistent college career, posted strong punting averages, and became an intriguing name even outside the mainstream spotlight. He's not surrounded by hype. He's the type of player scouts study closely and think, there's something there. On the other side of the story is Johnny Hekker, who arrives with a respected name and a long resume in the league. But he also arrives at 36 years old with a lot of mileage on his career. That doesn't mean decline is guaranteed. It simply means time catches up to everyone, even great veterans. And when a team makes this kind of parallel evaluation right after signing a known name, I see it as a sign of organization. This isn't about replacing someone immediately. It's about planning ahead before the position becomes an issue. Let me be very clear here. I like when a franchise treats special teams with real seriousness, because fans usually only remember that phase after something goes wrong. And by then, it's too late. A punter can flip field position, help the defense, avoid dangerous returns, and influence tight games without ever showing up in highlights. That part gets overlooked all the time. When he struggles, it feels like a small detail. When he performs well, he quietly prevents a lot of problems. Jeff Yerk also stands out because of his recent production. He had multiple seasons with strong averages and showed real leg strength. That alone justifies a closer look. I'm not saying he's going to be drafted by the Vikings. I'm not saying Johnny Hekker is under pressure. What I am saying is simple. Minnesota is monitoring a position that many franchises handle on autopilot. And to me, that's a positive sign. Another thing to understand is the different weight of this story. There's no locker room drama here, no internal conflict, no public storyline. What we have is a front office trying to stay ahead of the curve. And even small moves like this usually say a lot about a team's level of attention in April. Anyone who lives and breathes Vikings football knows these signals matter, because a strong roster isn't built only through first-round hits. It also grows in these less glamorous areas where almost nobody is looking. And don't get too comfortable, because the next story completely changes the tone. The calm of planning gives way to the kind of debate that makes half the fan base cross their arms and the other half lose patience. Quick favor, make sure you subscribe to the channel and jump into the comments. Your opinion matters here. Now, we move into the part that sparks the biggest debates before the draft. Not because it's entirely new, but because it touches a need that's obvious to everyone watching. And even so, the latest signs suggest the team might not address that need the way many expect. That's where things get tricky. Names like Alec Lewis, James Pierre, and Brian Flores come up in this conversation, and each of them helps explain why this topic is making fans uneasy. The takeaway gaining traction is this. The Vikings are not seen as favorites to use their first two picks on a cornerback. When you hear that for the first time, the natural reaction is confusion, because the secondary doesn't exactly feel secure. It doesn't. But from the inside, the team seems to view this equation differently. The addition of James Pierre helps support that idea. Not because he solves everything on his own. Far from it. But because this type of move usually signals that the coaching staff believes it can build the unit without spending premium draft capital right away. Then you bring in Brian Flores, and with him comes the logic of his system. Flores favors aggressive defense, varied packages, constant pressure, and keeping the opposing quarterback uncomfortable from the snap. When that structure works, the secondary benefits indirectly. Passes come out quicker, reads get shortened, and corners don't have to hold coverage for as long. That logic isn't random. It's grounded in experience. The issue is, it doesn't eliminate the discomfort of those who look at the roster and want more talent at the position. That's the tension here. Let's be very clear now. This is probably the easiest topic to split the fan base right down the middle. There's one group that fully buys into Flores' system. They look at the defense's recent performance and think, if it worked, let the coordinator keep building. But there's another group, and I lean a bit this way, that sees this as too risky to keep stretching. Eventually you face elite offenses, well-designed routes, and quarterbacks who punish every open window. At that point, no scheme can fully hide a lack of individual talent. And that's when this conversation gets real. Recent history also plays a role. Andrew Booth Jr. became a tough reminder of a high investment that didn't deliver expected returns. And when that happens, it's common for a franchise to become more cautious the next time it evaluates that same position. That helps explain the hesitation. It doesn't justify everything, but it gives context. While fans are calling for a cornerback, other options are gaining traction. Offensive tackle looks like a realistic path. Wide receiver is also in the mix. And that tells you something important. The team may be more focused on strengthening the offense than directly responding to fan demand. That disconnect is what makes this story so heated. It's not just about a draft pick. It's about a difference in priorities between those building the roster and those watching every Sunday. And that kind of gap never goes unnoticed among Vikings fans everywhere. Talk to me in the comments because this is a real debate. If Minnesota passes on cornerback early again, a lot of people are going to react immediately, and there's no time to ease into the next one because the next story brings a big name, a former team dealing with new problems, and an irony that feels straight out of the NFL script. Some situations feel like they're written purely to fuel debate. You move on from a major piece, try to sell the idea of a fresh start, and shortly after, the former team is already dealing with instability at that same position. That's exactly how this story gained traction again, and at the center of it is Kyler Murray. But before diving into the quarterback himself, it's worth looking at the situation left behind in Arizona, because that's where things get interesting. After Kyler Murray's departure, the Cardinals turned to Jacoby Brissett as their most immediate answer at the position. That alone wouldn't be a problem, but things started to get noisy when reports surfaced that Brissett is seeking a contract that reflects starting quarterback status and was not present at the beginning of Phase 1 of the offseason program. That's when the idea of stability starts to crack, and it cracks fast. Because when a team moves on from its former quarterback, the expectation is that the new situation will be cleaner, more stable, and with fewer questions. That doesn't seem to be the case. This brings Kyler Murray's name back into the conversation even stronger. If Arizona were cruising peacefully after the change, the discussion would be different. But when the replacement is already dealing with contract tension early on, the decision to move on from the former starter gets reevaluated. And the NFL loves turning that kind of irony into headlines. Mike LaFleur spoke calmly about the split, saying that sometimes it's better for both sides to go in different directions. That sounds fine, but both on the field and behind the scenes, consistency gets tested very quickly. And right now the Cardinals look less settled than they would like to admit. That's what keeps this story alive. Let's be very clear here. This is why this story catches the attention of Vikings fans. It's not just curiosity about a former team. It's curiosity about how Kyler Murray could fit into a system that has a recent track record of rebuilding quarterback value. Kevin O'Connell has become a reference point in that area, so it's natural for people to wonder, if there's stability, could this player rediscover his best form? That's the real pull of the conversation. The key point is that Kyler Murray has never been a simple case. The talent has always been there. Mobility, arm strength, playmaking ability, all of it is real. What has been missing over time is consistency. Sustaining performance over long stretches without falling back into the same questions. In Minnesota, that pressure doesn't disappear. It just shifts location. And maybe that's what makes this story so fascinating. The player changes environments, but the challenge remains the same. Prove that the full package can show up long enough to silence doubts. Meanwhile, Jacoby Brissett becomes an important part of the story almost unintentionally. Because every time a team publicly backs a veteran while also dealing with contract tension, the message starts to ring a little hollow. It feels like a temporary fix. And when that fix shows cracks early, everyone looks back at the player who left. The impact of this story isn't just about numbers, it's about contrast. Kyler Murray represents upside, potential, and a fresh start. Brissett represents short-term stability, tough negotiations, and a temporary solution. Arizona chose one path. Minnesota chose another. Now both will be compared constantly, and that only increases the pressure on Murray to deliver quickly on the field. Stay locked in because the next story raises the stakes even more. This is no longer about fit. It's about big money, market value, and a defensive player who could force the franchise into a major decision. Now things get serious, because when the conversation shifts to contracts for key players, nobody can pretend it's a small detail. The name at the center of it is Jonathan Greenard, and the pressure around him has intensified for one very clear reason. The edge rusher market just climbed another level, and when that happens, decisions get expensive fast. The spark came from Will Anderson Jr. His massive extension doesn't just impact the Texans, it resets expectations across the entire position. And even if Jonathan Greenard isn't asking for the same kind of deal as the biggest contracts in the league, it's obvious that this new market strengthens his case. Greenard's situation with the Vikings was already delicate before this. Since arriving in 2024, the general perception has been that he delivered more than expected for the investment. He stepped in and became a central piece of the pass rush almost immediately. In 2024, his production was strong, his impact was visible, and his name started circulating near the top tier of the position. In 2025, even with less statistical shine, his influence on the defense remained. He's not the kind of player who disappears without leaving a mark, and that's exactly why this situation carries so much weight. When a player delivers more than his contract value, the extension conversation becomes a ticking clock. If the team acts early, it can manage the cost. If it waits too long, it ends up paying more as the market continues to rise. Jonathan Greenard is right in that zone, not at the absolute top, but clearly above his current deal. Let me be very clear here. This is the type of situation where the team needs to stop hesitating and choose a direction. If the plan is to keep Greenard as a core piece of the defense, then it makes sense to push for an extension before the market climbs even higher. If that's not the plan, then external noise will grow, rumors will gain traction, and the perception of instability will follow. And that affects both the fan base and the locker room. There's another key point here. Greenard isn't just about sack numbers. He represents presence. He represents pressure rhythm. He represents fit within an aggressive defensive identity. Losing a player like that, or letting the situation drag on too long, doesn't just impact the salary sheet. It impacts identity. And when defensive identity starts to shift, it never affects just one area. It can influence draft decisions, rotation depth, and how the team allocates cap space in the coming months. That's why this story is heavier than it first appears. It's not just a player wants more money. It's how far is the franchise willing to go to recognize a foundational piece? And honestly, those answers usually reveal a lot about where an organization truly stands. Some fans look at Jonathan Greenard and believe he's already proven his value. Others worry about overpaying too quickly. The problem is, waiting too long also comes at a cost, and sometimes that cost is even higher than the adjustment you tried to avoid. That's the reality of the NFL, and the Vikings are getting closer to facing it head-on. The most important thing here is the message that follows the decision. If the team acts, it shows conviction. If it delays, it opens the door for noise and speculation. Let me know what you think about this situation, because this debate hits directly for anyone who follows the defense closely. And after all of this, it's getting a lot harder to call this a quiet offseason. And look at the scale of everything surrounding the Vikings right now. There's a quarterback situation still being debated, a quiet but important move in special teams, a draft approach that might go against what many fans want, Kyler Murray's name pulling attention in this new context, and Jonathan Greenard entering a space where market value and team decisions are starting to collide. That's a lot for one offseason. My take is simple. This team isn't standing still, but it's not fully settled either. And that's exactly why this offseason is so compelling for anyone who lives and breathes Vikings football. There's talent, there are major decisions, and there are choices that could shift the mood of this purple and gold fan base very quickly. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What's your take on these stories? Stay tuned. SKOL Vikings, let's go!